hard?
If you're a shy person, I think there are parts of it where it's a little scary. I'm not necessarily that outgoing in general, and you've got to be when you're doing a movie. You've got all these people. But it's such a nice feeling when you get this group together and you're all kind of working on the same thing together. And most of it is, the other good feeling is that when we're doing a movie, I happen to know that I'm the one who does have all the answers to every question they're going to ask, because I prepared all this stuff and I know the script better and I've worked on it all this time and I have ideas for how I want it to be. So I can take just an automatic confidence knowing that I have the right answers.
It is beautiful, Steve.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? I wonder if it remembers me.
Many famous directors spend a career cultivating a signature style, but it's almost unheard of for a director to almost immediately develop a signature aesthetic. That's exactly what Wes Anderson has done. A fan of clothing and furniture that seems to defy a time period, and sans serif typefaces like Futura, it's immediately obvious when you're looking at a Wes Anderson film. Born in Houston in 1961, Anderson spent his formative years writing plays and shooting Super 8 films. And when he met actor and frequent collaborator Owen Wilson at UT Austin in the early 1990s, the pair began to collaborate immediately, culminating in the 1993 short film that would dazzle critics at Sundance. That short film, titled Bottle Rocket, showed Anderson's promise as a director and secured him the funding to make a feature-length version of Bottle Rocket, made in 1996. The film was not a commercial success, but it charmed critics and became a bit of a cult hit. And by the time 1998 rolled around, Anderson followed up with Rushmore, and people were ready to love it. Love it they did, and Rushmore doubled its budget and was the first Anderson film starring Bill Murray, who would go on to act in every single Anderson film from that point forward. 2001's The Royal Tenenbaums was an even bigger success than Rushmore, and Anderson was fully a Hollywood darling by now. The days of shoestring budgets were over, and 2004's The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou cost an astounding $50 million, but it was worth every penny. It would have been nearly impossible to follow up such a run of phenomenal films with an even better one than Life Aquatic, and while his next effort, 2007's The Darjeeling Limited, didn't capture as many eyeballs, it did a lot with a smaller budget, and it marked his first collaboration with Roman Coppola as a co-writer. Not satisfied to merely play in the aesthetic style he had patented, Anderson made a bold move, and in 2009 he made a stop-motion animation adaptation of the Roald Dahl novel The Fantastic Mr. Fox. The film went gangbusters, and he returned to the animation style, but not before returning to live action for 2012's Moonrise Kingdom, which departed from his signature bold Futura typeface to showcase a new typeface called Tilda, which was designed specifically for the film. Kingdom was a tough act to follow, and almost in defiance of the odds, Anderson followed up with a film that won 4 Oscars, 2014's The Grand Budapest Hotel. In 2018, he made another stop-motion animated film, Isle of Dogs, which seemed to mint money and played to rave reviews around the globe. 7 of Anderson's 9 films are in the Criterion Collection. He's been nominated for 7 Oscars, and 6 cafes around the globe have adopted his film aesthetic to offer patrons the experience of being inside a Wes Anderson film while they sip a macchiato. With an upcoming film called The French Dispatch now in post-production, it's only a matter of time before audiences are treated to more quirky characters, biting dialogue, and a bit of whimsy, and some Futura bold as far as the eye can see.
Welcome back to Director's Cut. My name's Jon Dunning, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jason Alt.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back to the podcast.
Absolutely, sir. We are talking about film auteur. I mean, this is the definition of a film auteur, and that is Wes Anderson. And to get us through tonight, I have I'm finishing up a bottle of brown sugar bourbon from Heritage up here in Washington. And then when that's gone, I have a backup of Clyde Mays. So I'm drinking a lot of whiskey tonight, sir.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I am joined by a very special guest tonight. I got into my reserve of 120-minute IPA from Dogfish Head. This one's aged about 9 months, and then I chilled it for about a month. So it aged in the cupboard for about 9, which is a little immature. You like to let these go for at least a year, but I figured tonight was a special occasion, so let's do it.
Very nice. L'chaim?
Prost.
And that was the rest of the BSB in one gulp. So, there is... I wouldn't say Wes Anderson's really a I guess he is kind of a polarizing filmmaker because his style is so pronounced that you're either a Wes Anderson guy or you're not. And it's not like you're not like a...
So wait, he's not polarizing because you're...
Well, I'm saying it's just like he's not polarizing the fact like in the same vein as like a David O. Russell, where there's reasons why everyone loves to work with this guy. It's just that he kind of his filmmaking style transcends just movie making in general, and he doesn't make films. He doesn't make action films or comedies or any of that, but it's an amalgamation of everything. He makes Wes Anderson films, and I'm really surprised that in this day and age of Hollywood and how everyone is budgetary concern, and the only time that people really get a budget is when you're making these big blockbusters that are melting your face off, that someone like a Wes Anderson that truly has a unique, one-of-a-kind vision and voice is getting funding for these kind of films.
Well, he almost couldn't have started now, right? Like, it's very rare for somebody that's got that pronounced and obvious a style to come along, just because like it's a really tough sell for the suits in Hollywood. Like, other directors can like love people and like producers and stuff like that, but like you got to make a pitch to these studios who really, they're like, look, if we're going to give you $20 million to make a movie, we want it to make 60 because we want to spend 20 million on advertising. So can you make $60 million with Moonrise Kingdom? And maybe you can, maybe you can't. But like a new director coming along, I don't know if anybody would give him the latitude, frankly.
So you think he was kind of grandfathered in?
To an extent, but you got somebody like Yorgos Lanthimos that's got a very pronounced style too.
Yeah.
But I think he kind of skirted around Hollywood to get started. So I think... I don't know. There are other ways than Hollywood to make movies. I mean, the last Coen Brothers movie, straight to Netflix. The last Alfonso Cuarón movie, straight to Netflix. So I think there are other ways to get movies distributed. And if Wes Anderson only ever did movies for streaming services, that would be fine. As much as I like to go see them in the theater on principle, just for support. An Anderson movie looks fine on a 56-inch home television. So.
Yeah, and those filmmakers definitely came to mind too when I was thinking about that. But it's just like he's still doing these larger. They're not like huge budgets or anything, but they're enough budget to not have to compromise. Like he's still making these. He has a ton of movie stars in his films, and that is, he's probably getting a lot of them at a discounted rate at this point.
Well, the budget on Grand Budapest Hotel was $25 million for context.
Sure. And
so I mean that's not nothing. That's a significant amount of money. And if you look at something like Isle of Dogs, which was significantly harder to make, I'm not seeing budget information for that, but it also made $63 million worldwide. So, if they gave him under 70, they made some money.
It's like going to see like your favorite indie band or to go see like an art gallery is kind of the equivalent to going to watch a Wes Anderson film in the theater, because it's like I said before, you're not going there to see the latest. He's not going to direct Die Hard 10 because he's just not. He's just going to make another Wes Anderson film, and even he has stated in interviews where it's kind of a problem. A lot of people, from his detractors, a lot of people say that he kind of retreads this. It's a little bit formulaic as far as the aesthetics go, but I think he makes it just different enough, and the dialogue is always snappy and the performances are always great, that if you are in that boat and you are that kind of thing is speaking to you, you're going to want to go see it no matter how many of these he cranks out.
Anybody successful is going to have detractors, and it's not just an aesthetic thing. The tropes of his movies it's the same thing.
Yes.
It's always like a person who's got a weird relationship with their father. There's somebody in the movie whose parents are dead. They're going to fight with their siblings. You're going to see like handwritten notes and shit. There's going to be a love story, and the person's going to be sad, and then they're going to you're not going to know if you should feel happy or not at the end of the movie. I feel like he hits the same beats every single time, but I don't care because he can only play one tune, but I like it. So who gives a shit? The Beatles only knew 4 chords. At a certain point, it's sort of he's going to have detractors. He makes the same movie over and over, but if you like that movie, okay, good. I like the movie, so keep making them.
Yeah, I think the least Wes Anderson movie he made was Bottle Rocket, and that was just kind of a Wilson brother movie because they really kind of co-wrote that, which he would collaborate with them again.
But I want to come at it from the other angle because it's remarkable how Wes Anderson-y that was, and that was his very first movie. As crazy as it is for somebody to have their own style, it's almost unheard of for so many elements of that to be present in their first film when they didn't even really know what they were doing.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable how much Bottle Rocket looks like a Wes Anderson movie, as much as it doesn't to an extent.
Right.
Because he collaborated with Owen Wilson on a lot of his movies.
Mm-hmm. Whether it be acting or co-writing or, but the progression of his films isn't it's not like a Catherine Bigelow or something where all of the films were just kind of piss poor at first, and then they got gradually better until a lot of these filmmakers kind of find their own voice. Like you said, I think with Bottle Rocket, he kind of already found his voice, but he just implemented it better, and he used a lot of techniques, throughout his career a lot more. And I think that he is very much an underrated animated director. And I think that's kind of, instead of seeing gradual progression, I think once he got to the middle with Fantastic Mr. Fox, I think that experience really shaped him on how he not only did other animated like Isle of Dogs, but how he also shot. He used a lot of the same tricks during his animated films as he did in his live action films.
I think we can talk about that a little later because you're absolutely right. There was. I feel like the second half of his career, if you want to call it that.
Right. And
the second half so far, I feel like his second act as a director is abandoning a lot of the handheld camera tricks.
Yes.
Because he was famous for those whip pans and that sort of thing. And he's gone to a lot more stationary camera work and working around the camera as an observer as a result of his 2 stints with animated films. So that's something we'll get into. Because that's really important. I feel like Fantastic Mr. Fox perfectly delineates the split in his career, perfectly symmetrically, just like he likes to stage all of his shots.
Yeah, and that's maybe that's why Bottle Rocket feels so least Wes Anderson to me, because there isn't those complete, unabashedly perfectly symmetrical shots, and it's almost like a meme in his own films now. How almost, and it's not sometimes, it's almost every shot is perfectly symmetrical, and then now he's going to even when he's following and tracking and stuff, where it settles or where it whip pans to, we're right back into a perfectly symmetrical shot, and everything looks so picturesque, and I think that's why it's so. It's like eyegasm, because everything is so beautiful. Everything looks like a literal motion picture.
Absolutely. So there's a concept called knolling. It's a photography method where, usually done from overhead, where people will take tools or things on a desk or something like that, and they'll line them up perfectly at 90-degree angles. So it's very orderly and very pleasing. Sometimes people will take things apart, like a watch with a lot of intricate parts or something like that, and they'll line up all the pieces of it and just get everything. It's framed in a rectangle. Everything's really straight, and they take a picture of that, and that kind of thing is very aesthetically pleasing. A lot of artists who like to start out with their desk knolled. They line up all their brushes and all their stuff, in that grid. It's almost like all of his shots are knolled. He really loves that. He really loves to put objects like that, sort of when people are laying out, because he's got an elaborate plan in every movie, right? So when people are laying out their gear, it's all knolled. He loves overhead photography. So it's sort of like he took the concept of knolling and that is his film aesthetic. So the perfect symmetry is really important to that. He does a lot of rectangular, like a square framing more than rectangular. So he'll have like, if you look at the Grand Budapest Hotel, almost everything was square rather than like a big letterbox type deal. So I think for people that find that concept of Nolan soothing, or like they like the order of it, or they just like the aesthetics, he's like the one person who's really does that with his shots. And that perfect symmetry is really important for something like that.
Yeah, and people like a Stanley Kubrick used a lot of symmetrical shots. Even Yorgos Lanthimos, like we mentioned earlier, he shoots very Kubrickian. But this is on a completely different level where it's just literally constant. Like almost every shot has some sort of symmetry in it, or even if it's not completely like symmetrical. Like there's a lighthouse. Or like a lighthouse scene in Moonrise Kingdom, where one side of the screen has a lighthouse, but then it's balanced out with equal number of objects, kind of in the same shape, even if it's not in the exact same size. Which also, speaking of size, he does play with a lot of depth perception camera tricks as well, where he's not a huge, like besides like the claymation and the animation that he'll throw in. Obviously in his animated films, but also in his non-animated films like Life Aquatic, he's not a big, he's not a huge effects guy, and not even blood. Like people are constantly getting punched in the nose in these films, so you'll see.
Yeah, someone's always getting punched in the nose, and a lot of his movies have shootouts.
Yeah,
and see, the thing is, when a movie's mostly knolled, orderly, symmetrical, you don't have to have anything be super crazy to have it be really tense. If you look at a scene like The Life Aquatic, there was a crazy shootout where there were two crazy shootouts, right? Where everything was just insane and nuts and chaotic. But a scene that was just as tense is when Bill Murray and Owen Wilson are in the helicopter, and then the rotor goes out, and he stops shooting those scenes symmetrically, and you can tell something's wrong.
Right.
It was such an easy way to cue the audience that something's wrong when he just stops shooting those perfectly symmetrical shots.
Stops being Wes Anderson.
Exactly. You felt uneasy. You knew something was up. He didn't give you a music cue. He was like calmly like, "Oh, we're gonna go down." Like, it was a crazy tense scene, but he didn't really cue you with anything other than like, "I'm not doing these Wes Anderson shots." So as much as he loves to do handheld stuff and whip pans and stuff for crazy chaotic shots, he can cue you in pretty easily just on the basis of like pulling you out of those perfectly symmetrical shots he likes to establish when things are quiet.
Yeah.
And if you don't notice that's what's going on, you don't realize how subtly he's cueing you.
Yeah, and his tense scenes, like you said, everyone's getting punched in the nose constantly, and those are so effective because everyone's kind of playing it pseudo straight during the entire runtime of all Wes Anderson films. Everyone's very, I don't want to say it's like super deadpan. It's not quite like Killing of a Sacred Deer, kind of completely like dead-faced delivering the lines, but it's just very monotone. It's like people aren't speaking to the back of the room. There's no Daniel Day-Lewis's in a Wes Anderson film. It's just people talking like you and I would be talking, and even a little less animated than that. And then out of nowhere, someone's running away or someone's getting punched in the nose. The action scenes and the tense scenes are so subtle, and it's just like kind of blink and you miss it, but they're so effective because it's this like, it's like someone hits a sharp key on a piano note while they're doing while they're playing a symphony. It's this like this jarring little bit, and that's why I think they're so effective, albeit very absurd and always kind of chuckle worthy.
That's why his there's not a ton of blood, because it seems more absurd the less realistic it is. It seems like they're like playing at a shootout almost.
Right.
Like every shootout feels like the shootout scene in Rushmore in the play.
Yeah, or even in Darjeeling Limited, Angelica Houston going, the brother or the sister of the brother got eaten by a tiger, and everyone's like, ha ha ha. And she's like, no, it really happened. Where you're just like, oh shit, like that's kind of as effective as kind of seeing it.
People deliver really bad news at the same monotone deadpan that they deliver any other line of dialogue, and there's a lot of absurdity to his movies. The fact that everyone's got a really old telephone for some reason.
Yeah.
Like the first Wes Anderson movie I saw, it was in the theaters. It was Royal Tenenbaums, and I was like, I liked it, but I have no idea what year that movie was set.
Right.
And I didn't realize how deliberate all of that was. You know?
Yeah.
Where they're using like an old safety razor and like those old telephones, and all like the cars looked like they could have been from any point in a 30-year period. Like there were really no cues about what year Royal Tenenbaums was set in. And I kind of like that, you know? There's sort of a timeless quality to them.
Yeah. And I think Tenenbaums was my first film too. And I remember seeing, I mean, it came out in 2001. So, I mean, that was, 18 years ago. So I was pretty young watching this film, and I just remember people complaining about it when it came out, and I just like, wow, I really enjoyed it, because it's just the literal absurdity of the situations and the way people deliver lines, like how long have you been smoking, dear? Oh, about 22 years. Well, you should quit. Like that's the first thing that she has to say to her daughter, realizing all this thing while her son is in the hospital for suicide attempt. It's just, everything is always ramping up, tension wise and everything, but you never feel it because everyone is still kind of just cool about it.
I didn't really understand what I'd just seen, but I found the movie pretty charming. So I bought the DVD so I could like revisit it and really digest it. And I'm sort of glad I did, because like the first time I saw it with my parents, and I think my mother didn't really like it. And, I couldn't really explain what I found charming about it. And yeah. I think that's sort of typifies his movies, right? You can't really explain what you find about it other than you find it calming or aesthetically pleasing, or you just like the way he composed some of the shots. And I feel like people either get it or they don't. And that's perfectly fine if people don't get it.
And I totally understand where people were coming from with the early criticisms too, because a lot of, like, the entire cast of characters in a Wes Anderson film, even the ones that you're supposed to be rooting for, are pretty unlikable. They're all very self-aware that they're just the worst. Like, they're all, like, Gene Hackman knows that he's a shitty father. He knows that he is a terrible husband, but what's important to him now is that he wants to be reunited with his family, with a family that wants nothing to do with him. Or, all these different characters, like Moonrise Kingdom, kind of the same thing. Like Bill Murray and Franny McDormand are just like these horrible, they've fallen out of love 20 years ago, probably, these two lawyers that are, there's obvious cheating going on, and they sleep in separate beds, but they're just so self-aware. And even like Bruce Willis, who's, I can't believe he made Bruce Willis look entertaining in one of his films. That's a feat in itself. But they're all also self-aware that they're just like, they're just kind of going through the motions, and something has really gone wrong, and they're all on the back end. There's so much regret with a lot of his older characters, but they all are self-aware that the children are way more intelligent than the adults are.
And I think there's something to that. There's like, children don't have filters. So there's a purity to it.
Yeah.
And he didn't really utilize young children very, very well until Moonrise Kingdom. There was always like a super young character like, Rushmore or Royal Tenenbaums with Ari and Uzi, but like I feel like he really used very young children perfectly as a narrative tool in Moonrise Kingdom.
I think that he learned a lot from Owen Wilson's character in Life Aquatic too, where he was just like, he's kind of the analog child looking for his estranged father. Bill Murray is essentially the father. He's essentially Royal Tenenbaum, and and that's the thing about Wes Anderson, where he learns from, like we're going to talk about where he learned different shot compositions and different tricks from being an animated film director. He also learns from his character developments too, because all of them are very similar.
It's always like a man-child trying to get his father's approval.
Yeah, exactly.
With a stern, cold mother played by Angelica Houston 90% of the time.
Sometimes Franny McDormand.
Yeah. And like it's funny, he's using the same cast of characters to tell the same story a bunch of different ways, and I think there's a comfort in that too. I like that.
He always has like a special guest though. It's just like, Rushmore with whoever the teacher is. I'm blanking on the name. Or Royal Tenenbaums. It's like guest starring Ben Stiller. So he always has that like kind of out of cast. He had.
Well, he never used Brian Cox again after Rushmore, which I would like to see him use Brian Cox again. Olivia Williams played Rosemary in
thank you.
Rushmore. Another person he uses a lot that I don't know if people caught this. Andrew Wilson is Luke and Owen's brother,
the real tall one.
Yeah, but he doesn't. I don't know, for whatever reason, he basically like does Wes Anderson movies. But he was a real antagonistic character in Bottle Rocket. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder, since there's always sibling rivalry with the three of them, I wonder if they like fought a lot. It just, you gotta wonder how much of that is the the Wilson's influence versus Wes Anderson, because I feel like you can see some elements of that in the way the stories are told. There's a lot of sibling rivalry, and not always sibling rivalry, because if you look at it like Life Aquatic, the two siblings are Owen Wilson's character and Willem Dafoe's character. Mm-hmm. They're almost they both want Steve to be their dad. So there's like a sibling rivalry there. So it's kind of funny once you know that how much Owen Wilson contributed to the writing of some of these scripts. You start to see some of the stuff that has to be about their life that really doesn't really apply to Wes Anderson. And I think having Andrew Wilson come back as an antagonist to them a few times is really interesting.
Yeah, and I think the same can be said for Jason Schwartzman and Roman Coppola, because I didn't really know this until doing the research for this, but Jason Schwartzman is a Coppola. He's in the Coppola family, and again, a frequent writer and collaborator. That's why I think Darjeeling Limited was like the brother movie, right? Because you had Wilson and Schwartzman. I think that's why that works so well with Adrian Brody. I don't know. He always kind of stuck out to me in that film.
I'm not a big fan, so I find his mere presence jarring.
Yeah. But I mean, that's when he started using, and this was before Fantastic Mr. Fox, but this was a lot of the, you got to see a lot of the dollhouse. Well, I mean, Life Aquatic too, especially the scene where they're literally walking through the set stage of the submarine, or the boat rather, where he likes to shoot his scenes, especially like the main places, like either the houses or the ships that they're taking place on, or the trains. It's all cutaway where you don't see walls. They even play with this in Moonrise Kingdom when Bruce Willis is calling Tilda Swinton, where you see he likes to split it half and half, and that's where it's like not so much symmetrical, but you get to see, you get to kind of pass through it like you're staring at a dollhouse.
Talk a little bit about him as like a cinematographer and as a collaborator with Robert Yeoman, who I think the first film Yeoman did for him was I want to say Bottle Rocket, because he was given money by the studio to make his 1993 short from Sundance into a feature film. And so he's been working with Yeoman on, I think, almost all of his movies. And he's the one who developed the anamorphic style. He wanted to do that for Bottle Rocket, but like the studio said they couldn't tell the difference, so they wouldn't let him do it. But unlike the rest of his movies, he likes to really use wide-angle lenses and like zoom in.
Yeah.
And there's an effect that if you don't really know anything about lenses or like scene composition or that kind of stuff, there's something a little bit unsettling about a wide angle lens used really in tight, and you're not sure what you're seeing, but it just feels a little off. But like, if you don't know what you're looking at, you're just like, okay, this is how the movie is, and then you get used to it. Yeoman really likes doing stuff like that. The whole dollhouse thing, he really likes to use wide angle lenses and get way back, And actually, he told a story about on the set of The Life Aquatic, they built the boat a little too big. But the thing is, they couldn't have built the boat any smaller because there were people in the shots. If it was just a dollhouse, you do whatever you want. But there were people walking around the set. So he had to get a wider angle lens than he'd ever used before. And like, I think it was Sony or whoever, or Kodak, they sent him a wide enough lens, and he had to get back so far he wasn't in the room where they built the set. He had to go back through the door and like into a hallway and like shoot to get everything in frame. And I think his collaborations with Yeoman, who I guess he'd seen Drugstore Cowboy and really liked that, but Yeoman's does some other movies you might have seen, like Dogma, Whip It being another movie. Andrew Wilson, who I talked about earlier, did. He's actually been in more movies than I thought, including Idiocracy and some other stuff I really liked. I like Whip It a lot. So I think his collaboration with Yeoman sort of informed a lot of what he does as a director. Because I think that whip pan technique is something maybe they came up with together, but it's actually evolved. So I think we could get into like how his style has been informed by his animation, because you have to use a stationary camera for the animated films, right? And one thing I noticed is he still does the whip pan, but now it feels like it's more on an axis, like it's on a tripod.
Right.
So the whips are smoother, and when they come back, it's on a symmetrical shot. So if you look at like Bottle Rocket, the main whip pan when everyone was running to the van after the botched robbery,
right?
You're looking at the van, you whip over, and someone's running, and then you whip back, and it's sort of like a messy shot. But like that whip pan where he like you look back and forth, he does that for dialogue a lot. When someone says something and then you see how they react and then you see what they say back, he does that a lot. But now when he does it, he ends up on one of those symmetrical shots too. It's not messy, it doesn't whip somewhere messy and whip back somewhere messy. Both where the camera was pointed initially and where it ends up are planned ahead way better, and that's something that he only started doing when he started shooting a lot more stationary camera stuff for stop motion animation, because you can't have a camera wagging around when you're doing stop motion animation. It's got to be rigid on a tripod. So that was something I really noticed. Like after Fantastic Mr. Fox, the whip pans are planned out so much that where the camera ends up after the pan is still a Wes Anderson symmetrically framed shot. And he didn't really do that before, and I thought that was so interesting that when I noticed that.
Which the perfect example, like you said, the example of an unrefined version is in Bottle Rocket with the van. A perfect example of a refined version is in Grand Budapest when the butler is in the confessional and they're walking in and it whips over there and you see everything lined up perfectly, and then it snaps back and you see the hallway, everything's perfectly squared and rectangular. So again, he's one that kind of learns from himself. Another thing that I think him and Yeoman do that's very unconventional is, when you watch a traditional film, a lot of the time your focus is on if it's a close-up, your focus is on the POV character, and then there's a blurred background or whatever. But he does a lot of stacking with dimensions, which is really cool, and he did that a lot with. Again, I think this is probably something he learned because he had to do so much with in-frame in Fantastic Mr. Fox. But you look at Moonrise Kingdom, and there's that one scene where they're kind of sneaking into the other camp, and you have them all kind of lined up on a fence, and then you have kind of a camper in the background or in the foreground, kind of looking at them funny, and then I think Jason Schwartzman's walking in front of them. So there's all these different dimensions, or even when they're in the field looking for the girl, and Bill Murray's kind of off and doing something, and then he kind of marries that stacking of dimensions with the tracking shot and lets the action or the character and the scene development kind of progress the scene instead of using traditional jump cuts and all that. So
yeah, that field scene in Moonrise Kingdom was masterful for a lot of reasons, because it didn't track smoothly. There's a scene in Rushmore where they're at the fish tanks and the camera kind of pans real slowly as they're moving past the fish tanks. In Moonrise Kingdom, that scene where they're all in the field, the camera moves, then stops, and it comes to 4 different resting positions. And if you'll notice, instead of the camera kind of dictating what happens, there are off-camera cues.
Right.
You hear some audio, and then the camera pans or it doesn't pan. It tracks over. It tracks over to the next position and stops until you hear another off-camera cue. And I thought that was a really interesting way to do that. And that was a way he could have 4 different things going on. Well, 8 different things, really, because there are 4 positions, but there's background and foreground. Mm-hmm. There's all kind of stuff going on. So, like Bill Murray walking over to stand on the motorcycle, even though he's not part of the scene, really, you follow him, and then you hear a conversation off camera. I think that was a really interesting shot, and I think you're absolutely right. The way he did pans even changed when he started doing animated films, because that scene's almost like it's composed of 4 dioramas.
Yeah,
if you think about it,
right.
But the background foreground thing is not really exclusive to his later work, because he loved to have characters that you're looking at, you're learning about a character, but he loves to have them stationary and have stuff going on in the background rather than the character doing something dynamic. Like the first time you see Luke Wilson's character in Royal Tenenbaums, he's just sitting and there's people walking by in the background, and I love that because it's like the first introduction of the character, and he's just sitting there. I really think that kind of thing is interesting because the scene doesn't seem boring; it seems dynamic. But there's nothing going on in the foreground.
It's almost like it's a shot documentarian style, where before it was the camera would kind of dictate what is going on in the scene, where I think later on the characters and the progression kind of dictates where the camera goes, and the camera kind of follows.
Yeah.
He's doing kind of the same thing, using the same bag of tricks that he's constantly refining and adding a little bit more, so he feels very comfortable in this space, I'm sure, whether it be working with the same actors over and over again, so he has that comfort level, or using the same kind of techniques with the camera, and especially with humans. Polarization comes from, because I could definitely see, I'm not one of them, but I could definitely see people going, oh, I'm going to go see a Wes Anderson film, and I'm just going to go see kind of a Wes Anderson film, kind of the same thing.
Sure. Well, he's his own genre at this point, right?
Right.
Like,
exactly.
He's not even an aesthetic. He's a genre. So, like, you're going to go see a Wes Anderson film.
Yeah.
There's comedies, there's westerns, there's superhero, there's Wes Anderson.
And like you said, like Yorgos Lanthimos, nowadays he's a newer filmmaker and that's kind of exploded on the scene, but he's definitely genre bending, but he's not his own genre, as you stated. He's making thrillers, he's making period pieces like The Favorite, where Wes Anderson is, it's just gonna basically the dressing's a little different, but it's still entertaining as hell, because you're always gonna laugh, and you're always gonna have. It's just so immersive, because every film is a fable. It's almost like. It's like you're 5 years old again, going to story time at the library. Well,
yeah, almost the way things are laid out, it's almost like you're reading a storybook.
Mm-hmm.
Or like with a lot of pictures, a lot of big palettes with like, all right, everything's yellow in this shot.
Very much pastel.
It's an old 1970s looking yellow Formica table with a 1970s style melamine molded yellow cup, and the guy's wearing a yellow shirt, and the 1960s style telephone hanging up on the wall in the background, even though it's 2015, is yellow. And it's not even like he has palettes he likes. He just really likes to match everything in the scene, which is how you can have a Wes Anderson cafe.
Yeah.
You know, you can have like, well, this is the kind of furniture that would go in a Wes Anderson cafe. Here's everything knolled. Here's everything with like weird backgrounds and like, you know, a weird exotic bird like a falcon just hanging out. Like, I don't know. Like, if you say Wes Anderson cafe, you immediately get a picture in your mind of what it might look like.
Kind of like a Pier 1 Imports a little bit. Where different parts of the store has like this. We're now entering the blue portion, and this is the red portion, and that very much feels like a Wes Anderson film. But instead of different rooms being different colors, every film has its kind of own color palette. You know, Life Aquatic's all very blue. And yellow, I would say. But yeah, like a lot of them.
He uses yellow on. That's his main color, really.
Right. That's his zero, right?
Yeah.
And he does like the slow-mo too. Which,
yeah, there's like every movie's got the slow-mo shot. Every movie's got someone getting punched in the face. You know, every movie's got the the bird's eye view shot. Every movie's got the typewritten shot. And every movie's got the handwritten note, you know. He's got stuff he likes, and you know what? It adds to like his aesthetic. It's just all part of what makes up a Wes Anderson film. And even the animated ones sort of had a lot of that stuff. So I think it's really interesting how he's just hung on in there with like, hey, here's what makes a movie. There's always a weird elaborate plan with a hand-drawn map, and everyone's like, you know, every movie with the exception of Moonrise Kingdom uses Futura as a font.
Yeah.
Sorry, typeface. Font's not the... I think I'm the only one bothered by that. What everyone calls as a font is actually a typeface. Future is the typeface, but they actually made a typeface called Tilda just for Moonrise Kingdom, which was named after Tilda Swinton, who don't know. It's actually that is Wes Anderson. He's Tilda Swinton. They are the same person. If you've seen pictures of both of them,
or watched an interview, yeah,
he is Tilda Swinton.
Yeah,
Wes Anderson is Tilda Swinton's nom de plume for when she wants to direct a movie.
Yeah, man, he's it's not like he's not a risk taker either. I mean, he tends to be a little formulaic, sure, but Moonrise Kingdom is kind of a ballsy movie to make. I mean,
we were talking so much about Moonrise Kingdom when like Grand Budapest Hotel we haven't mentioned once, and that is his masterpiece.
I agree. I mean, my personal favorite Wes Anderson film is Moonrise Kingdom, though. I think
it's because it typifies his second era style. His coming off of Fantastic Mr. Fox, you know, it was like, here's the kind of movie I make now, and it was sort of like, as much as someone came out of the gate, I think Bottle Rocket was a very strong movie. It's one of the strongest first films we've seen from a director.
Yeah.
I really, it was the second movie I saw from him.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bottle Rocket's fantastic. And as good as that is, like, and as good as he was early, because Rushmore is great.
Yeah.
You know? Like, Royal Tenenbaums is his third movie. Are you kidding me? That movie's great. The fact, even someone that came out so strong, the fact that he matured so much as a director on the basis of, like, here's all the things I learned making Fantastic Mr. Fox, which I loved. Moonrise Kingdom was the first thing where it showed how much he'd matured as a director, just on the basis of working under the restrictions of doing a stationary camera stop motion thing. So I think we're talking about Moonrise Kingdom a lot because I think it really typifies a lot of the techniques he used to great effect in the latter half of his career so far. And so I think that's why we're harping on Moonrise Kingdom. Plus, it was, a really whimsical and delightful movie.
Well, it's a little toned down, too. It's funny because it feels like one of the more animated ones, like actually animated with like the big tree house. It feels like one of the more fantastical live action films of his, but
there were more models, I think, than any other movie he's done. And I think, hey, when you work with models, how would building these models and using forced perspective to like put them into the scene, how would that work? A lot of in Moonrise Kingdom, this is like a nothing shot. When they were talking about their plan, it was the first time the map was animated.
Right. Yeah.
Every other movie, even Mr. Fox, they were drawing on the map with a pencil. But in this, like the map itself was animated, and that was a shot most people don't notice. But like that was sort of like a thing you would have done in an animated movie, and I really like that too. How much? You're talking me into liking Moonrise Kingdom a lot more than I like Moonrise Kingdom.
Because it's just so. I mean, first of all, personally, I'm just such a sucker for like a coming of age kind of like film, and a Wes Anderson one. Like, yes, sign me up. But again, it's just everything's so like. It's more washed out because everything is like beachy because it has to be because it's sure. Just the setting itself where coming out sometimes you get a little bit of eye fatigue looking at these bright pastels or even Grand Budapest where everything is just so jumpy and flashy,
pink and purple, and
you don't get a moment like in Grand Budapest. Everything is so funny and so and like I'm saying that like it's a bad thing, which it's not, but like Moonrise Kingdom gives you a second to sit there and kind of let scenes develop a little bit more, where it's not so much about the Wes Anderson aesthetic that moves itself out of its way a little bit for you to actually just enjoy the film.
Well, that honestly was the least Wes Anderson aesthetic movie of all of them because so much of it took place outside.
Yep.
Every Wes Anderson movie's in a dollhouse, right? With the wall ripped off. But like so much of Moonrise Kingdom was outdoors that like all the characters were Wes Anderson characters, but they weren't on a Wes Anderson set. And Yeoman actually said in an interview that like some of the shots they wouldn't shoot them from the other character's perspective when they were talking to each other, so they would have both people framed in the center talking to each other because the background was in a completely different location. So like the foreground and background, like if you'd swung the camera around, you'd see they were in a completely different place. So they had to do a lot of more stationary camera stuff just on the basis of like, well, we couldn't find the perfect location, but we found the perfect half of a location looking this way. And if we turn the camera around and point it the other way, we don't want what's back there. So we'll shoot all that stuff somewhere else. So doing a lot of tricks like that, he found the perfect locations outdoors just on the basis of creating them where they don't exist.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think Grand Budapest, like you said, and I can't disagree. It is a masterpiece. That is his. Up to this point, it's his magnum opus. It is. I think it's as animated as it could be, and not be Isle of Dogs or Fantastic Mr. Fox. It's just so cartoonish. Even like
like the ski chase was so cartoony looking. And he accomplished a lot of that by mounting the camera. Because before they would have been more kinetic, with all the skiing and everything. But like mounting the camera on the sled, and like the characters, their faces are completely centered at all times, and everything in the background's twisting.
Yeah,
like that was, that's how you get like a kind of a cartoony look. It looked like they accomplished a lot of the ski chase with models, stuff like that. One thing that I really think he doesn't get enough credit for in Grand Budapest Hotel that I don't think anybody noticed is when he did each different decade, they used cinema conventional aspect ratios of that era.
Right, yeah.
So like they shot like 85:1 for the stuff in the 80s, and they shot like 120 for the 70s, or like whatever the aspect ratio that was common in cinema at the time. And most people didn't notice that. I didn't notice that.
It literally in the beginning of the when the credits are rolling, it says switch the aspect ratio on your television set.
Yeah. Yeah, so that like every time they shot a different decade in that movie, they used a different aspect ratio. So like you got clues from like the interior, you know, and like people's clothing and stuff like that. And that was like the only movie where like it was very clear what decade it was in, just on the basis of like it took place over a series of decades, where everything else seems a little timeless. I really like that he unconsciously they did a lot of work to give you a cue that you didn't even realize consciously you were seeing, just to put you in a different mood. And I think if he hadn't mentioned that, I wouldn't have ever noticed it. But like there are so many ways that you're being unconsciously cued in these movies that like if you're not looking for it, you're not going to notice. But now that like I go back through these movies looking for this stuff, I'm like, oh man, I didn't catch that the first time, but that's why it made me feel that way. I think
Easter egg now, yeah.
Yeah, well, it just shows how meticulous he is at planning this kind of stuff.
I think the greatest feat from Grand Budapest is just how frenetic that film is, but also how precise it is. Everything is just so goddamn clean. Everything is just perfectly shot.
The shootout
is symmetrical. It's just like...
And I think that's another thing we keep harping on, like how in the second half of his career, after he made Fantastic Mr. Fox, how things are a little bit different. But there was a scene in Mr. Fox where they were like, where there was fire everywhere and everything was chaotic, you know, but like they had to shoot it stop motion. So you had a stationary camera that couldn't move a millimeter because you were doing stop motion. So compare the firefight on the boat in Life Aquatic when someone throws a grenade at one end of the boat and then it shows it exploding on the other end of the boat. Like he didn't even really plan out where on the boat the things were happening in the firefight. Like he made such a huge mistake that he lost track of which end of the boat the grenade was supposed to go off on, right? And after Mr. Fox, the shootout in Grand Budapest Hotel still felt chaotic because it was a shootout, but also all the camera pans were clean. All the shots were clean. He still managed to make it feel chaotic without having a person literally holding a camera, physically whipping the camera around.
Right, yeah.
It was on a tripod, but everything still felt chaotic because he matured as a director enough to know how to sort of cue you in that chaotic stuff was going on without relying on whip pans, which I think is a little bit of a crutch when you're doing it handheld to show that things are nuts.
Right. And even I think Isle of Dogs is, although I think Fantastic Mr. Fox is definitely a superior film, certainly story-wise, but I think Isle of Dogs is just...
Well, that's Roald Dahl. That's cheating, right? One of the greatest children's storytellers of all time. You adapt something to his, like not holding Wes Anderson up to that standard doesn't seem fair. You know?
But he was also learning a lot from that film. Like that was the first time really doing these things, and then you see something like Isle of Dogs, and it is a breathtaking looking film. It's a great film. I love the hell out of Isle of Dogs. I think it's great, but like I said, Fantastic Mr. Fox, there's just no comparison. It's just such a, oh man, it's like a near perfect film.
But he added enough stuff to it.
Yeah.
Like he made it his own. Because like another director wouldn't have made the exact same movie. There's a lot of Wes Anderson stank on Fantastic Mr. Fox. A lot of choices went into it.
Yeah.
The story was like a guide, but he made a Wes Anderson movie out of somebody else's script, which is nuts.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Where you compare that to Spike Jonze doing
Where the Wild Things Are.
Exactly. And
yeah.
Which I mean, I still give him credit for because
I think the Sendak family really appreciated what he did. Yeah. I think Spike Jonze put a lot of Spike Jonze into that movie.
Yeah, it's so brutal and everyone hated it, but I'll go to the grave defending that film because I just thought it was It was daring, dark, but yeah, I mean,
if he cast that a little bit differently, that could have been a total disaster. But I think a lot of the casting choices he made were really super defensible. Yeah, Gandolfini for sure. Super defensible.
Yeah. I don't like doing these sometimes when I can't find like, it's not like I can't find a flaw, right? But it's just like...
Well, the worst thing you can say about Wes Anderson is his movies are pretentious, and that he makes the same movie over and over. And, like... I don't know. I like the one movie he makes.
Yeah. It's like, here's your grilled cheese with bacon. It's like, yeah, I'll eat it every single time and I'll love it. And I don't...
Well, I don't think the female characters are necessarily particularly well developed in a lot of his movies. They seem more like foils to the male characters. I don't think he does as good a job developing female characters. And maybe that's like... Because it's like...
They do seem like a backdrop.
There's like a 10-to-1 male to female character ratio in his movies, first of all.
Yeah.
And they always seem a little bit antagonistic. It's always like Angelica Houston, like, being like, oh, I'm sorry you were stunted sexually because you had a weird, cold mother. Like, you got to wonder what his relationship was like with his parents, because he's always trying to get his dad's approval and his mother just does not care about him, but he doesn't care that his mother doesn't care about him.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So, like, it's... Yeah,
because Luke Wilson could literally give a shit about any past transgressions that Royal has done to him as a father. He's daddy's boy. Yeah.
Yeah, whereas Ben Stiller was sort of like, he just didn't give a shit about his dad anymore because, like, he disappointed him enough as a kid. Yeah, it just, yeah, that's really interesting.
It really is. And Kate Blanchett is insufferable. Her character in Life Aquatic too, and yeah, that is a huge thing, because you always like just assume that, oh, you know, you're gonna cast Angelica Houston to be a badass, but yeah, she just always plays kind of a one-note shrew, and that you know, I guess the Darjeeling brothers, you know, they kind of seek her out, but it's mostly just to talk about Dad, and why didn't she go to their father's funeral?
Yeah.
Ah, man.
So I mean, if you really want to nitpick Wes Anderson, there's stuff there.
Yeah.
I don't think he handles female characters particularly well, for example.
There you go. Everything else is just the best.
Yeah, I don't like when I like a director too much.
Right?
I sound like an idiot, right? Like, I think I sound smarter when I crap on somebody. I sound dumb, like, oh, I saw the movies and the guys are good, man. I liked the movies are good.
Yeah. It's like, where's the discourse in that?
And that's maybe that's a weird crutch for like writers and critics. Like, you sound smarter because, like, on the sheer basis of putting myself above this person and defecating on them, I'm inherently superior because I said a thing that makes me better than them. It's hard to appreciate somebody and sound smart, and we don't care about sounding like suck-ups and idiots on this podcast, because you know what? We like Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
Fuck you. Get your own podcast.
Yeah, pretty much. This is Soderbergh all over again. Oh man, we just love Soderbergh. Apparently,
well, half his movies were bad, and like, he's a genius, right?
But Soderbergh's great because he just like figured out Hollywood, and that's just fun because he's like a heist director that understands like kind of the heisty things in real life too, and that's endearing. Where Anderson's just like, I mean, I don't, but I mean, go watch an interview with Wes Anderson. You're just gonna be like, God, just give me the film, because this isn't this.
Oh yeah, that's another thing about Wes Anderson. He's yeah, he's weird. And like, I look up quotes sometimes to like, here's a quote from the director. There's like nothing intelligent he's ever said about any of his movies that I could relate to anybody. Like, it's hard to watch him be interviewed, and it's hard to hear him be quoted. And he's clearly a smart guy, but holy shit,
he's no Refn. Like, he's not on that level of
no, yeah, well. The shit Refn said, it was so dumb. You're like, oh God, this guy made good movies on accident. I don't think Wes Anderson made good movies on accident. I think he's a very smart guy, but like, the stuff he says is just So yeah, okay, fine. We are fair and balanced by shitting on him to the largest extent we could, which is not a lot.
We just don't like him as a person. No big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He's got a movie called The French Dispatch, slated to come out in 2020.
Sounds like a Wes Anderson film.
It sure does. They made fun of him on the movie or the TV show Catastrophe by saying that his next movie was called The Emancipation of Benjamin Crisp, which doesn't even sound necessarily like a Wes Anderson movie, but I thought that was a nice subtle dig at him.
Sure. Yeah,
but the cast for French Dispatch is sort of interesting.
Yeah.
Tilda Swinton's back, Willem Dafoe's back, Franny McDormand's back, Owen Wilson's back, Adrian Brody's back, Jason Schwartzman's back. But listen to this: Elizabeth Moss, Suarez
from
Ronan,
what is it? The Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, she's a Scientologist, so that's disappointing. Ooh. Yeah, Bill Murray's back. Kate Winslet, I think this might be her first movie.
Yeah.
And Benicio del Toro, I think this is his first Anderson movie.
Awesome.
Christoph Waltz. And Rupert Friend. So, I think it's a nice mix of people that he's used before and people he's never used before. So
you're missing one very important one. That's Henry Winkler.
Winkler?
Yeah, the Fonz is in this film.
In the French Dispatch? Nice. Hey, that's nice.
It doesn't say, it just says written by Wes Anderson too, so I'm sure, I don't know, is he going solo on this? He doesn't have Coppola. I mean, Schwartzman and Wilson are in the film, but it doesn't mean he's and that's another thing, working with the same people over and over again. How much do you think it's the whole room, like a collaborative process of these? Like, should Wes Anderson basically be looked at as a troupe of making movies, or is it mostly should be accredited to him at this point?
I don't know. I feel like there are some movies where they're like, we're gonna play family in this movie, so let's hang out for a week together just to build some of that. I think if you click with somebody, why not always work with them?
Yeah.
Why not have a person? If you're Bradley Cooper and you can do whatever you want, right? Anybody who calls you, they're like, we need Bradley Cooper. Why not have somebody there? If they called you at 2 a.m., you'd be like, yeah, I'll do your movie.
Yeah.
Why not? Why not have some people who are about what you're about? Because there's so many people you're going to fight with and butt heads with and just collaboratively not really click with. Why not just do what feels comfortable and control some variables? Because having actors who are going to be predictable, it's like, this movie needs a Luke Wilson type. Why not control some of the variables? Because making a movie's hard. And making a good movie's hard, and having 7 of your 9 movies be in the Criterion Collection is impossible. Who else has that high percentage? Michael Bay, probably, because his art school teacher is on the board for the Criterion Collection. She's like, The Island, that didn't have Transformers, you're in.
He was really trying to make an art piece over there, yeah. He's got Bill Murray's 1-800 number. Do you know that Bill Murray has a 1-800 number?
He does, because he doesn't have an agent, and that's how he makes mistakes. Because he heard Joe Cohen wrote Garfield. He's like, Joe Cohen, I've always wanted to work with him. It's like Cohen with an H, Cohen. Dipshit.
Yeah. But also you're
yeah. But also you're Bill Murray. You're not going to do Garfield. Come on.
Right. Yeah. You are Garfield. Yeah. So he's like he has Bill Murray, even at his advanced ripe age. He's just like, yeah, I don't even have to. He just says, let's go. Like, Wes Anderson just has to give him a time and place to be there, and he's there. So, I mean, that's saying a lot. I mean, Bill Murray's a legend, right? So, to have that kind of trust and work with, people like Jeff Goldblum. It's not like he's working with schlubs either. I mean, he's working like Edward Norton, and it's typically these actors that have kind of a reputation for being, kind of difficult too. Like Edward Norton is a dick to work with, I've heard, but
Oh yeah, he's a terror.
yeah, he seems to love.
But only because he's a perfectionist, and I think someone like Wes Anderson can see someone like Edward Norton's a pain in the ass because he cares about making the movie. And if you're a good director, you're like, oh, good, he cares. And if you're a shit director, Edward Norton's like, fuck it, I'll edit it myself. Like,
he's literally the same character from Birdman in real life. That he
yeah, and that's why he's not the Hulk anymore, because he was such a pain in the dick. But it's also the reason American History X probably ended up a better movie.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes Kurt Russell's got to be like, you know what? Fuck you, I'm directing Tombstone from here on out. Sometimes you got to take the reins. Man, that's not really what's happening with a Wes Anderson movie. So I think he can handle the likes of Edward Norton for one film.
And then you see the one and dones. Like even Wes Anderson can't keep Bruce Willis or George Clooney for too long.
Well, I think he wanted a Bruce Willis type.
Yeah.
Sometimes he'll write a character and be like, "Well, we need a type
who's miserable." Yeah, and just completely monotone. Oh, Bruce Willis. Yeah.
Yeah, we got Bill Murray to be miserable and monotone in this movie. We need one more.
Who's worse? Yeah, Bruce Willis.
And there's some people he only works with like once or twice, and you wish it's like, fuck, he couldn't do more with Harvey Keitel. I'd love to see more Harvey Keitel roles in his movies.
He got him twice. He had him in Grand Budapest and Isle of Dogs.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Isle of Dogs had a great voice cast.
Oh my God, Ralph Fiennes. Like, I would love to see him back. His style of acting lends perfectly to a Wes Anderson film. So I'm hoping that we'll see them kind of link up again.
Because he gets body language out of people a lot. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, Ralph Fiennes is really good at doing really deadpan with his delivery, but weird with his body language. It's just Grand Budapest Hotel was just nuts when he was like, "Oh, she's been murdered, and you think I did it," and he just takes off running. That's such a Wes Anderson thing, where someone just like takes off running for no reason.
Yeah, Bill Murray was originally cast in that role. He was like, "I'm not fucking running." Get Ralph Fiennes to do it. Yeah. He always casts Will Dafoe in the weirdest roles too. Like, if you want the weirdest guy, then William Dafoe's your guy in your Wes Anderson film.
He's just one of those guys where, like, you know that he's constantly thinking of a role for Willem Dafoe, and I love that.
William Dafoe's a vampire. He was never old, never young.
Yeah, he's always looked like he's 47.
Yeah, so that is, I think that about does it for this.
I mean, I think we covered a lot of what we want to cover, just both about him as like as somebody setting up things aesthetically, but also like technically as a director. I feel like he might not necessarily get enough credit for some of the choices he makes, but I think his collaboration with Robert Yeoman to like use those wide angle lenses and kind of like make these weird, unsettling shots when you're in close with a wide angle lens. It kind of looks weird, and but also the way he sort of like frames everything all boxy and like Nold style. I think that's something that nobody else is really doing. Like, nobody else has a font. Like, you couldn't show me a font, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's Paul W.S. Anderson's font from Resident Evil. Like, you can't.
Yeah,
that's Paul Thomas Anderson's font. No other Anderson and no other director has their own typeface named after Tilda Swinton. So I think he's got so many signatures that I think he's just going to continue just pumping out good stuff for the people that like what he's about, and I can't wait for his next movie, frankly. So I wish we'd had more bad things to say about him. Sorry, everybody. We sound like a bunch of sycophants, but I really enjoyed this episode. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Yeah, and just before we go, I just want to say that whether you like Wes Anderson or not, you just kind of have to, if you're a film fan, you have to appreciate just a filmmaker that is one of a kind. There is I mean, I think Ben said, last episode when we were talking a lot about Tom Cruise, where, Tom Cruise is singular. There's only one Cruise, where there is only one Wes Anderson. And that is hard to do, because Cruise, you could plug into a lot of different types of genres, a lot of different types of movies, where you only
get any 4'7" actor with a tooth in the middle of his face.
Exactly. Any Smurf will do. But yeah,
what's Paul Giamatti up to?
Which I was really upset that there was no Paul Giamatti in any of his films, and then there was, but then he shows up for 2 seconds in Life Aquatic, just to get punched in the face by Bill Murray, and I felt like my life was complete. One thing that's really irritating me this entire episode is how unsymmetrical I am in the shot, and it's just like doing a Wes Anderson.
I'm the same way, and also I've been looking slightly off to the right to look at my notes. That was weird. Like, why does he keep looking?
Yeah, talking about all the symmetry, and I'm constantly trying to do my own little tracking shot to get. Just to do them.
Well, if you planned your shot a little bit better, like Wes Anderson would.
See, there you go. We've only been doing this for over a year. Yeah, but if you like this episode, you want to listen to it in podcast form, go ahead and do so on iTunes, iHeartRadio, all Spotify, all those things. Give us some ratings. Thumb up the video. Subscribe to the channel for more director's cuts and other movie jargon on here. But yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at OrsOfDone. Where can everyone find you, Jason?
I'm on Twitter at Jason E. Alton. I have a pin post that talks about all the different stuff I do that's not necessarily movie related. Thank you so much for being a supporter of our work.
Perfect. Until next time, we'll see you at the movies. Finger guns.
Pew pew. It's a shootout. Pew, pew.